Hello and welcome. I'm Jim Coppin with Rankin Technical College. So this video will be about Lab-05-03. Kind of just wanted to go over quite a few things actually with this and kind of give you maybe some hints, some suggestions on strategy on working with this one. This is quite an extensive lab. It's 18 pages long. It's pretty much kind of the meat and potatoes of this final project. A lot more complex type stuff is in here. And don't get too frustrated. If you have any problems working through this, just go ahead and commit what code you have out there in on your final project, and just send me a note, and I'll go take a look at it. Okay. I expect that many students will need assistance with some one area or another. So first, I want to kind of talk about a little bit about our back end and our front end, and some of this will be a little bit of a review, but kind of wanted to go through a few new things as well. So in our directory structure, we have our front end, and then we just have basically our back ends at the root directory. Right? So everything, just as a review, everything in the front end is basically when you access the application, everything that's in the front end is going to be brought, when you make the request, is going to be brought into the browser, right? All that front end is brought into the browser. And basically, when I say all the front end, it's the build, right? We're using the Vite tool, the Vite build tool, and it creates we create a dist directory, and this dist directory is what all gets brought in, right? And that is basically your whole front end, okay? And Vite will go ahead and create the app so that the browser understands it, right? The browser doesn't know what JSX files is, right? And it doesn't understand many other things as well. So Vite kind of takes care of that for you, okay? It's going to kind of, recompile it, reconfigure it, and make it browser friendly, right? Now what's in our root directory, basically our routes and everything else, is our backend. So in our case, our backend is running on our local we're just starting this right here on our local machine. We're started in a terminal. You could even be outside of from your perspective. We're always looking at it from Visual Studio Code, but you could just bring up a regular command prompt, go to the right directory, and start up your server, right? Don't necessarily have to be in Visual Studio, but from our perspective, we always look at, we're starting our server within the terminal in Visual Studio Code. So that is our backend actually running on our local server. Now, in the real world, well, obviously in development, that's how you do things. When you decide to go to production, then, maybe like you're deploying to a cloud platform, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, etc. So there, it's still the front end's going to be the same thing, right? When you make a request, you're just making a request to the cloud, and the cloud's returning that front end, returning that whole dist directory, right, to the front end, to the browser. Okay. The other code, your back end, which is in the root, that's all going to be running in at your cloud provider, right, within the cloud. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Just there's a separation between front end and back end. Our back end is in the root here. We have a different package. We have a package.json file for our back end that's in the root. And then we also have a package.json file that is in our front end. Okay. Now, the way we've kind of done this to kind of actually make it simple, in our index.js file, we went ahead and included this. Okay, this is so when we integrate both our back end and our front end together, kind of a simple way to do it. So you just start one server, right? As opposed to You know, you could still set things up. You don't have to do it this way, but then you have to have a server running for your front end and a server running for your back end, and then they talk to each other, right? Um, so, for simplicity reasons, this is how we went ahead and did this for this course generally. Is just go ahead. We did this to add our static front end, which is basically our disk directory, right? But just remember, especially as we move on here, and you're making, you know, you got your when everything's configured and you're hitting your back end from your front end and all that's going on. Just remember, any changes you make in your front end is not going to be reflected until you build a new disk directory. Okay, you'll have to build a new disk directory when, and I'm talking about when we have it all integrated, right? Another option, though, early on, and this is the strategy I would take for now. So we're used to running that server within the final project directory within this root. That's where we used Postman to test the routes and everything, right? That's where our routes are. But instead of doing that, this is the strategy I'd actually take if I were you. For your front end, and this one here is a previous student's where this is kind of his final project, so this has everything in it, okay? But for, you know, at the point that we're at right now, okay, you've got your front end, you don't have a lot of this stuff that, you know, this student has here, right? We're not accessing our back end yet, right? What I would do strategy wise for a front end, I would, in this lab, it talks about the different things you're going to be using here. So Axios here, that's basically used to make calls to the front end. So the Axios part and also the auth part for the auth token, I would not include those pieces in your front end code right away. What I would do is I would use your user and your bugs, the basically mocked up data, right? And so what I would do is mock up some data, drop them in your files, build your screens using that data, okay? Using that data. And then when you kind of get things going pretty good with that, then come back and we'll start adding the calls to the routes, right? Add the authentication stuff in the routes, okay? So one thing you could do here, because especially maybe some of the mock fake data that you made up originally probably doesn't match what's in the database anymore, right? That was kind of the first, you know, attempt at it, and so that data is a little different, right? So what I would do is go into like Compass here, and then you can go in and grab this data. So like over here on the right hand side, up over here, you can just do, right here, copy to clipboard. So copy that, right? And let me just bring that up. You can copy that. And so there's your first record. There's your first, and in this case, this is a user record, okay? This is a user record. So you could use this, you could take this data, okay, to create some sample ones. So you want to do more than one user, you know, whatever, you know, and eventually you really want to do one here. This is really incomplete. You want to have a technical manager, a systems analyst, all those different roles. But, you know, to start out, you could just do one, whatever, just to get things working. But you can grab, and you can do the same thing for bugs as well, okay? You do the same thing for bugs as well. The good thing about this is when you created these, you know, you added certain things to this. And so this will have everything you kind of need, right? Here you got permissions, you know, lots of different things that you'll need, right? You know, created on, because somebody might have used created on, somebody might have used a different word, a different variable here. You know, it depends on what you used, right? So this is going to match what's in your database, and then you can test with that. And then your code can reflect that data that's in the database, right? You're using the right fields and everything, okay? Just an idea. You know, and you can put this in an array of users and then use that data. Okay. Um, and that's what I would do. Okay. So like I'm saying, in the lab here, it talks about the access stuff is basically calling your routes, and also the authentication where it has auth. I'd skip that for at the beginning. I'd get your pages, I'd play with your pages and keep on developing that, okay? And to do that, right, you just go ahead and create that fake data in wherever you're using it, right? And then you'll have that. And then what you can do is instead of starting that server on the in the root directory like we've been doing, use the one here. Okay, use the one here in. So this is package.json's for the front end, and this is just has the vite. What is it? The vite dev, right? So we do npm for that, right? We always do npm run for any script, and then just do dev. Okay, and so this is going to be running, and so here you've got this, and I'm going to actually bring this up. But this is going to fail right away, okay? If I tried to log in or something, okay? If I tried to log in, this would fail right away because basically, and in this case, is because all these calls are in here, all this authentication stuff, all these calls to the routes are in here, so this would never work, right? But if you don't have your auth or all those calls, you could come in here and still see this, right? You could still see your different screens, and maybe you could just start out with a home page and click the links, right, to go to your different pages. Get everything looking good first, right? And so then you can just keep on making changes, and it'll get reflected without you having to worry about it. You don't have to worry about the dist directory right now, right? The only time you have to worry about that dist directory is when you've got when you're got everything integrated together, your back end and your front end. So if you just want to be developing your front end using some mock data, some made up data, which I would grab what's in your database, so it's reflective of what your how you called variables, because students did things differently, right? And that way you're using that correctly, and you can display, you can display your information as well. You can display your users, your bugs, and everything else, and you can see that data on your screen, right? And then once you get that looking, pretty decent, then we can come back and start adding the calls to log in, right? Add the calls to our different routes. But before you do that, so obviously you're going to get it looking in pretty good shape. Then you're going to come in and do your create your new dist directory. And if you recall, just so I can run this again. So once you get everything looking pretty good, okay, notice we're in the front end directory here, right? And we can just do npm here, run, and then we do the build, right? And that's going to build out that dist directory, okay? And then build out that dist directory. So hopefully now you've got something that's, running pretty good, right? And then you can go ahead and include that. Obviously, like I said, though, that's when you're going to start, you'll have to start adding your authentication and your calls to the back end in here at that point, right? Build it, and then you want to start your server. You don't want to start this front end server again, right? At that point, you want to be at your back end, right? Or the root directory, I should say. So it's just how we're doing this. We probably could have created a back end folder to make things make more sense. But our back end's basically in our root here. But here's our final project that we basically always call run start dev, right? And so this is going to fire that up. And then for this app, let me grab a login for this one. If I login failed your credentials and try again. Let me see what might be going on here. Oh, I know. What I try to do is, because I brought this up in that different port, right? The front end port. I need to change this to the 5000 port. I have to change this to the 5000 port, right? This is, now, I do this, try this again. Now this should work, because I'm heading right there. There we go. So, and so, here's this app, just, list the users and so forth. But like I said, this one's already integrated with, the authentication and making calls from the front end to the back end routes, right? So, okay. But that's the strategy I would do. I would go ahead and just create mock data. Don't worry about doing, don't worry about the front end, the back end code at all right now. And then you can just make those changes. So you get this server running, you can just keep on making your changes here in the front end. Boom, boom. It's going to be reflected right away, right? It's going to be reflected right away. You'll see all those changes and get things working a little bit, and then come back, do the authentication stuff, and make the calls to the back end, okay? That's the hardest part. That stuff's harder. These other things, well, and this lab's very challenging, okay? This is going to challenge you, okay? Just do your best. If you have any problems, check in your code, and just send me a note, and I'll go ahead and take a look at it, okay? So let's go ahead and go through some concepts here on a few things. Let's see here. Looking for another document. Okay, let's just review some of these technologies we're going to be using here. So we got Axios. Axios is a popular promise-based HTTP client for both browsers and Node.js environments. So basically, we're doing a Node.js environment, right? Its primary purpose is to make asynchronous HTTP requests to external resources like your backend APIs, and that's what we're using it for. Why it's used in React? React applications frequently need to fetch data from APIs to populate dynamic content. Axios makes this process straightforward and easy to use. It handles a lot of complexities with this, okay? And I'm not going to go through a lot, but basically it's just it's a way for you to access your route. Well, for our purposes, it's used for us to access our routes from our front end to our routes. Okay. Moment.js. So this is a JavaScript library designed for parsing, validating, manipulating, formatting dates and times. Okay. I'll show you an example of this and how this works. Okay. It offers a user-friendly way to handle various date-time operations. Why it's used in React, displaying dates in various formats, basically all that's telling you here. So we're going to also be implementing that, okay? And like I said, earlier, if we want to skip the auth and Axios stuff from the beginning, you can still do all this other stuff. You can do the moment, you can do the reactor router DOM stuff. All this stuff can be done before you worry about hitting your backend services, right? So React DOM. So the React router DOM is a collection of components that enable declarative routing in React applications. It allows you to define different pages or views within a single page application and navigate between them seamlessly without requiring full page reloads. So React Router DOM is fundamental for managing your application's URLs, okay, and rendering the correct components based on a route, okay. So we'll take a look at that. And then there's also this browser wrapper, and the browser router. It acts as a wrapper that enables dynamic routing in your React application. When a user clicks a link or navigates to a new URL, browser router intercepts the request and updates the UI to display the appropriate component without needing to reload. And then one other thing we're going to be using here is React Toastify. And what it is a customizable library for adding little notifications on your screen. They're not as intrusive pop-ups, and we'll go and take a quick look at that. So Toast notifications are an excellent way to give your users immediate feedback on their actions, like item added to a cart, login successful, etc. Okay. So just wanted to kind of go through that. These are some of the things we're going to be adding here. That's part of this lab assignment. Bear with me for a minute here. Let's just kind of go through a little bit of this first. So step 4, go ahead and skip this for now. Okay, let me come back to this later. And because we'll have to, to make things work for a cloud, we're going to have to do some special configurations a little bit. So here's the browser router I was talking about. And this is done in the main.js file. We'll go ahead and go take a look at that. So let's go ahead and take a look at that first. Obviously, you're going to do these imports, right? And, make sure that you have did installs on all of these. You need to do installs on all of these. I'm not going to show you how to do installs. You all know how to do installs. So let's look at that real quick. All right. Bring up the main here. So obviously here's your browser router. You get that from the React DOM, and not much you have to do here, and just you include it right here, okay, in the create root. Also make sure you've got strict mode as well, okay. That's going to help you it's going to catch mistakes that, sometimes, as we've learned about JavaScript, sometimes you can do something, everything looks fine, doesn't complain, there's no error, but things just don't work, right? So, strict mode will help you with that, okay? In here, don't worry about this. This is something separate, okay, that this student has done, okay? You want to kind of do it how it is over here, okay? Just do it just like that. Okay. Now, a lot of this stuff right here, you can go ahead, this app.jsx file, you want to go ahead and add all of this, okay? And all of this can be done, like I was saying, all of this can be done here without worrying about the authentication, without worrying about calling your back-end routes, right? All of this can be done without worrying about that, okay? Now, when it does start talking about adding auth, okay, that's where things start getting a little more complicated, right? So where it starts talking about adding auth, you can do your nav bars. You could do your nav bars. You could do your nav bars as well. But wherever you see authentication or your Axios, then you kind of want to, I would skip that for right away, okay? And, just work on your page, getting your pages looking good. You can add your footer. And then when you're coming back to here, when you really start getting into your login form, after you have an initial one, that's probably the first place we're going to go ahead. You want to kind of go ahead and start, because the login form is kind of the first one where you send a request to your back end. That's when we go ahead and flip that and start working on getting that synced up, right? But like I said, initially you can do a lot of these things without worrying about your back end at all, and you can just be using the server that's part of Vite, the Vite server, to go ahead and get things configured. Okay. Did want to show you a couple more things here. Okay, so the moment module, I'm going to kind of show you that. Obviously, you'd have to install it and then import it. And in this case, the student down here, let me go down here a little bit. So what he did, what you do is just kind of, you use moment and then your whatever your date was, right? And this is created on, okay? This is getting it out of this object in this case, but the created on date, right? And so if you look over here on the right-hand side, this right here is how this is going to end up getting displayed by moment. It's going to be registered. That's the registered. And it was from now, it's going to say an hour ago. So an hour ago, I created this. This other user was registered 2 months ago. And actually, the way I actually went and changed, and you can test some of this stuff too. If you don't, you can change your create date. I went ahead, you can go out here and just change your created on date. So like the one I just created here, I could go ahead and change this date to, let me change this to a whole different year. Okay. I'm probably going to, in this case, I'm probably going to have to log out and log back in though. So in this case, we've got the one I just changed. I changed it a year back. Now it says registered a year ago. So this one was registered a year ago. This is 2 months, and this is 2 days. And that's how this moment module works. Okay, kind of just gives you a little more instead of a certain date. It was registered a year ago, a month ago, a day ago, an hour ago. It's basically based on like that. Okay. So the next thing here, I'm going to bring up bugs. So the Toastify, so that one was the moment. Let's take a look at Toastify and how that looks. So just follow directions that's in the lab assignment, but you put that in your app.jsx for the Toastify, and you make sure you have got this toast container. Okay, so this is actually always going to be included, and it's going to be available all the time for everything, right? So this toast container actually has, and you'll have to add these things, right? Show success or show error, okay? And like I said, one thing you don't want to put in here right away, especially if you just want to spend some time getting your screens developed, don't put in the auth stuff right away. Skip that auth stuff, right? But your Toastify stuff will work without authentication, without your back end, and also the moment. So both of those will work. And then all this link stuff will work without your back end as well. So you can get that all in. But the show success, so what you're doing is showing a success or showing a failure based on what happens. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and click bugs again. And you'll see a little message down here. This is that Toastify, this Toastify message right down here, okay? Let me just users, right there. Users loaded successfully again and again. Oh, I just put some things in there. I was testing something. That's why I got that again and again. Bugs loaded successfully. And then obviously if there's some kind of an error, you're going to get an error message. It'll be red and you'll get an error message. Okay. And another good thing about these, because like this one, if you just kind of hover on this, like if, maybe you might have especially for an error message, you might have something, for a success message, usually some short little thing, but for an error message, you might have some little more in here. And if you hover over this, it'll stop, right? It'll stop until you move off. See how that's working like that? Okay. It's kind of a nice little feature. And then eventually it'll go away when it runs out. So you can go ahead and add all of that in your front end without having to worry about the Axios, the back end calls, and you're off. So what I think I'll go ahead and do is stop here on this video. And like I said, if you have any problems up to this point, please just check it in, send me a note, I'll take a look. I'll go ahead and do a separate video, a little bit about the authentication stuff, the Axios calls, and so forth. Okay. So please let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.